Morning all. I quite fancied doing a follow-up video on e4, e5 opening names. I did an e4 openings overview which some people found very interesting, and I thought I'd carry on now looking in more detail at the major opening systems which received official names. So like roads in a map, the named roads are often the most important strategically. So let's have a look. E4, E5. So the King's Pawn game systems. Well, white can play the King's Gambit, so F4, so offering gambits. It's a true gambit, unlike the Queen's Gambit, which it's difficult for black to hold on to the pawn. So if black wanted to hold on to the pawn, he can in this. Okay, and I've got my handy reference book. Credit to Modern Chess Openings. I'm having a look at that just to grab onto key names. So King's Gambit, and within the King's Gambit, you've got the declined variation where white, black can decline with, say, Bishop C5. So that's one way to try and maybe strengthen control of D4 and the diagonal generally. Try and expose the white king early. Okay, but after e4, e5, knight f3 is much more common, not the King's Gambit. So we have a variety of systems. So this is the King's Knight opening from here. Now if black plays f5, this is known as the Latvian or Greco counter gambit. By the way, this is in the master collection, this software I wrote. It's using Ajax. It's, if you go into Chess World and you become a full member, it's on Play Better. Learn from the Masters, an interactive board where I've been filling in a lot of the annotations here for key opening moves. So if you're interested in that, so Latvian counter gambit. So this is like a reverse King's Gambit in a way. It's something which I've been playing in Blitz quite a bit. It's great fun. If white does take on f6, you've got things like Queen f6. But anyway, so let's go on. Let's look at the major tools at black's disposal. So the Philidor's defense, named after the 18th century player Philidor, who coined the phrase "the pawns of the soul of chess." That's very, very popular on Chess World as a major defense. Even though it's a bit passive, though, it's so popular at many levels. Let's go on. Instead of that, there's another way black can proceed. The Petrov defense, very, very solid. I think Kramnik used this and another very solid defense to take out Kasparov in the Brain Games match a few years ago. So a reputation of being dull and uninspired. However, it is very, very solid. Let's move on. Very, very brief overview this is. So after knight f3, let's now look at knight c6 and now c3. So this was recommended or played by Staunton, Howard Staunton, not to be confused with Steinitz. Staunton was significantly weaker, but he gave rise to the Staunton style pieces. So we respect him in many other ways for promoting the game of chess and our interface to the game with his beautifully designed pieces. But he played this, so the idea of a quick d4. Unfortunately, black can counter with a quick d5, so we get a critical line Queen a4. And then black has various options, including gambits like knight f6. So it's not that popular at the moment, but it's good as a surprise weapon. So that's Ponziani opening c3. Let's go back. Now here, there's also d4, just d4 immediately. That's called the Scotch Opening. We saw Carlsen play that in the World Blitz tournament recently with good success. So it's a dangerous gambit. I think it can be revitalized with engine analysis. It's not a bad gambit. I've got a few notes here. So white aims to dominate the center. Black is practically forced to play ED because you can't really support that E5 pawn. So that's a very interesting thing. The Scotch. I keep on thinking Scotch eggs. People say the Scotch game, and sometimes I'm not really sure. I have to remind myself what it is actually. For some reason, the name of this one, anyway, eludes me sometimes. what they're talking about, people talking about. So now let's go on to the main line territory. After knight f3, let's go back, e4, e5. The main line territory I consider is the Ruy Lopez, so named after the Spanish priest. So in the Ruy Lopez we've got various systems to have a look at. So now the most popular move is a6, trying to break this pin and this pressure generally. But before we look at that, there's this, the Caudal Defense, and this is also classical according to Wiki. So it's proved safe enough to just play bishop c5. This is stuff really which is worth experimenting with in blitz games to see if you're comfortable with the ideas. Now here's the Berlin Defense, so another logical and solid move. Bizgu apparently played this line for a long time, and it's been taken up with by Shirov more recently, Kramnik, which I mentioned before, and one of his boring lines to defeat Kasparov in the Brain Games match of 2000, was it? 2000. So that's the Berlin Defense. Now also we have here, if we d6, the old Steinitz Defense. So Steinitz, the first official world champion. Bits solid but passive, this d6 move. Tarrasch was later emphasising activity and taking risks with pawn structure, a bit more dynamic in his approach than Steinitz. But Steinitz believes in a solid pawn structure, even at the expense of passivity sometimes. So here's another one. I've seen this being played actually by some by some British grandmaster, the young one Howell. He's played this. It's the Cosio Defense. So the Cosio Defense is a really interesting thing, just basically adding support to that knight, maybe g6 and bishop g7 for developing this bishop. So also Bent Larsen has been using it apparently, so it's a nice little surprise line. Now the Bird's Defense, moving a piece twice, I know breaking a rule, but it's got some points to it, I think. If White has to spend time after capturing to play c3, sometimes White can end up a bit passive. So it's not that common, but I think some strong players still play it today, the Bird's Defense. Now here's a hyper-aggressive idea, a sort of delayed King's Gambit reverse. We call it the Schliemann Defense. So anything involving the F file, usually hits F2 and gives Black a dangerous attack if White misplays it. So it's really good for fun in blitz chess, this kind of Schliemann idea, this F5, or earlier the Petrov, anything with F5, when Black castles, that F file is going to be really dangerous. So that's the Schliemann Defense. Closed systems, so the Morphy Defense, the most popular. And now here we have a few ideas. We can immediately exchange, so that's the Ruy Lopez exchange variation. That's playable, not to try and win a pawn really, because knight e5, queen d4, Black's going to be about equal. But there's other moves here like knight c3, castles, or d4 to add a bit of pressure. So it's quite respectable to take, a bit dull maybe. But bishop to rook 4 is the most common. So now here, so this is the modern Steinitz Defense. Now this Morphy Defense, and we can go deep into Ruy Lopez territory here, or maybe I should reserve that for a third part, more detailed video, because I just really wanted to do an e4 e5 overview here. Let's have a quick look. After bishop, we said about this, the Caudal Defense, and knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. Let's try knight f3. We got Berlin here. So this is Berlin Defense. I think I'm repeating myself. We've looked at the Schliemann. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. So f5 Schliemann. in the exchange is taking on c6. The modern Steinitz defence we've briefly looked at. So let's go forward past this complex here in the royal pairs. One named variation here, the Shigurin. So knight f3, castles, bishop e2. Now this goes deep. Let's follow this. So this is all standard stuff. So knight to a5 here. Now c5 from black. Tons and tons of theory in this. Still popular today, this variation. So black's getting some potential pressure on the c file.